and the same opportunities going forward. So that little bottom arrow that says graduation rates historically disadvantaged populations are nearly equal to the overall population is, again, something that we're really proud of, that 91% graduation rate. But one of the things that I love to do as a scientist by trade and an educator by profession is that I want to look at data. So what does that really look like? When we start out, we typically end up with about 1,000, or we start out with around 1,000 students in our transitional kinder programs coming into our schools. But when you look at the numbers that we graduate, we're only graduating about 6,000. All right, and this data is a few years old, so those numbers could have shifted. But we started thinking about like what's going on with these kids over time. Where are we losing these kids, and why are we losing them? We trace back. Many of the students are leaving our schools as early. Many of the students that are not graduating from our schools, we can tell as early as third grade that if they're not reading at grade level, as measured by at the time the CST, and they're not up to grade level standards in math, then we typically see them start to have attendance issues and behavior issues. And when they get into new grade levels, their attendance goes back up. Well, when they find out that they're behind and they're struggling, that the attendance starts to drop and behavior starts to increase. And so we've tried to think about, as a district, how can we shift that narrative for kids? How can we provide relevant, engaging learning experiences for all of our students so they can see themselves in education and they can see where education might take them? So getting to know our community here in San Diego was also imperative, because we not only want to make sure that our students are graduating, but we want them to be successful in whatever they choose to do in life. And we know that we're stronger together. And so partnering with the partners across San Diego, companies like Illumina or Vertex or Raytheon, these big names that really want to ensure that San Diegans are able to fill positions, that workforce looks like the students in our community. And so we've learned from them over time that, it's not just enough to know things. We need to be able to work together, solve problems, recognize diversity, celebrate that as a strength of all of ours, and bring that together in order to solve the problems that we face, not only today, but those that will happen in the future. We also have learned that STEM jobs pay more. And if we can support students in ensuring that all opportunities are open to them, not just after they leave high school, but many of our students go into middle school thinking that math or science is not for them. What happened to those kids along the way? What did their journey look like to set them up to say, I hate math or science? We know that these jobs pay 2/3 more than regular jobs. And we also know that we have severe underrepresentation of females in engineering and computer science, and underrepresentation across most students of color and people of color in STEM jobs. So it does not reflect the rest of the workforce. So what can we do? And so one of the things that we thought is, like, what if we started early? What if we get to know the skills that students need not only to be successful in our schools, those collaborative, communicative, problem-solving skills, can we infuse that into experiences for students? Can we make sure they have opportunities to practice this as they're learning content, as they're working together? So we learn not only from national data and world data, but also from our own ecosystem here, partnering with labor and yeah. And another thing that we know as well, you can see my daughter at the top left, is that engagement for students drops off over time. So when you walk into a high school classroom and you literally see kids nodding off or falling asleep, what are we doing in schools? Like, what is important for students? We feel, as part of our STEAM initiative, that we want students to guide their learning, to engage in projects that are meaningful to them, that they can make change in their community. So when we see that engagement over time, and seeing my daughter 100% engaged and seeing workforce data of people 17% engaged in work on average, we know we need to do something differently. So we developed a STEAM program because we feel like graduation is not enough. We want to provide a meaningful graduation for students. So what can we help them identify interests over time and try those things out? So STEAM to us is an initiative that we started in the transitional kinder space, and it's rolling up grade level after grade level. Up through 5th grade, to provide collaborative interdisciplinary inquiry approach to learning, to see opportunities, to build empathy, create interventions, and ideally to use that knowledge to impact their world in real and positive ways. So we base our curriculum off next generation science standards and computer science standards, but also bring in the arts and music and English, and math, and try to make the most integrative, relevant, engaging learning experience for students as possible, all with individualized supports. And we'll talk a little bit later about how we include representation as a huge piece of that. So STEAM innovation, we want our students, our leaders, our teachers, all to be curious, creative change makers. And this is just a quick example of something that, one of our units that we provide for teachers. How are humans impacting our environments? What does that look like? In a training I was doing earlier today, we were showing a student that made a rap based on Old Town Road about we don't want to use plastic bags anymore. So replacing the lyrics to try to change the community perspective on using plastic bags versus using a recycled bag. So we feel that by providing that curriculum for our teachers, we can provide them a foundational support that will allow us to teach into how we should be interacting in our classrooms. By providing the what, we can work on the how, and we can support the mindsets about why this is important. And one of the great things about this initiative is that we are continuously getting feedback from students, from parents, from teachers, and from administrators to make this the best, most inclusive project possible. So talking with my superintendent, we knew what our goals were for the school year, and we also knew that students were going to have severe gaps coming into this next year. And so we thought again, like, what can we do to make summer learning engaging? How can we provide a platform for student voice, for students to share their learning with each other? And so again, we went back to our participants and said, hey, our partners, what can we do with you all? So we developed summer challenges where students could go out and pick a social justice issue, work with transcendence, and put together a dance or a piece of music or a piece of theater and share that information with others in their community. We worked with the Ocean Discovery Institute, who has a charge to increase diversity in STEM, and they challenged high school students to come up with new ways to get more people excited about STEM careers, which also impacts our work in the elementary space. And then Your Voice in Government, something we're building out right now, that how can we help people see problems in their local community as an opportunity, not only to learn about government, but to advocate to government, to get them on your side, to use the system to your advantage, to help to make change. And that could be anything from police funding to things that we see as far as injustice or inequity, or it could be something as simple as like fixing a crack in the street that your next door neighbor keeps tripping over. So how can we learn about government and then use the government system and advocate to elected officials to try to make those changes? So with that, I will pause.
Thank you so much to the three of you. Wow, what a start. And you may not be able to, well, you actually can't see this, but in the chat, we're just getting so many amazing comments about people loving the content that you all are providing, and people really enjoyed Broderick taking a moment with you at the beginning. So, we thank you for that. So one of the biggest things when we sent out the registration, everyone sent in questions about what they wanted to talk about, right? And one of the largest things that thankfully Laura pointed out to us is that at the basis of all of this was this larger question about how do we define anti-racism? And I'm going to ask this to our three panelists. Before I do that, I'm just going to share a couple of definitions that we've come across online. So being anti-racist results from a conscious decision to make frequent, consistent, equitable choices daily. These choices require ongoing self-awareness and self-reflection as we move through life. In the absence of making anti-racist choices, we unconsciously uphold aspects of white supremacy, white dominant culture, and unequal institutions in society. Being racist or anti-racist is not about who you are, it is about what you do. And that comes from Talking About Race, which is a collective of research and opinion from the National Museum of African American History. We have another definition that says anti-racism is the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies, and practices and attitudes so that power is redistributed and shared equitably. And that's from the NAC International Perspectives Women in Global Solidarity paper. And so with that, I just want to pass it back to the three of you. And if you all give me, your high level, top line, just 1 minute answer to that question about the definition of anti-racism, because I know that we could take up the rest of the time all talking about this subject. But I'll pass it over to Broderick first.
Thank you. It's a great question, and I really appreciate the definition here from talking about race, particularly the what you do. I really believe that, you know, when we're at that Thanksgiving table, or when we're in our family reunions, and we're at our convenings, when we're around the good folks that we know, and we hear that comment that we feel in our soul is not right and very akin to some of those ideologies that are aligned with being embracing that racist mindset, is what do you do at that point? Do you just listen to it and just say, oh, Uncle Johnny is just, you know, he's wilding out, as we used to say back in the day? Or do you take a moment to challenge the thinking? Are you okay with being uncomfortable? My daughter plays soccer down at Georgia State. She can't go to one of her teammates' homes because they were having a frank discussion about what's going on in the world today. And our teammate's dad was just like, I don't want to be uncomfortable in my own home. I get that. At the same time, are we ready to be a little uncomfortable with some of the conversations that we need to have to heal? And so I just really appreciate it. If we're going to get to that place where we're able to put all of this stuff behind us in terms of all those aspects of white supremacy, white dominant culture, and unequal institutions in our society, like, we have to be willing to be uncomfortable and have those conversations. I think through the dialogue, we can hopefully begin to find some healing in that aspect.
Thank you. Now let's pass it over to Laura.
I think I grew up like many people who share my background, just trying to not be racist and thinking that was the goal. And then realizing like that obviously was not nearly enough, and knowing that there was racism and that was bad, and then wanting to work against it. But I think that it's been in the past few years that I've really understood that unless I am actively anti-racist at all times, then I'm participating in it, because racism, as Dr. Beverly Tatum says, is the smog in the air that we breathe. And so we're constantly all receiving racist messages. So how are we consciously, consistently fighting against those? And then how are we identifying and dismantling the systems and cultures that perpetuate racism in the circles we're in and the institutions with which we engage? So for me, on a personal level, one thing was deciding that I need to be reading authors of color consistently. So I read a book a week. 75% of my books I read are by authors of color, because I recognize that for over 40 years I had mostly white voices in my head at all times. And so that's, you know, one small thing I can do. But then in a sphere of influence I have, what are statements I can make and positions I can take forward to the local school district about curriculum and making sure that it's representative and inclusive? And then the organization in which I work, how can I support and partner with my team to make sure that we're identifying and dismantling examples of white supremacy culture in our thinking and in any of our practices? And then how do I stay constantly open to feedback every year from our fellows and our professional teachers about ways that our organization can come into greater alignment with our values? I think we all want to be anti-racist, and we all are on a journey for that. And I always know that I always have a ways to go on that. And ultimately, I hope that we can look back on our lives and see that we change the policies and we change the structures that were racist, because that would change the outcomes. I want to change hearts and minds, but I don't think that's our only responsibility. I think that we have to change the systems, and the hearts and minds will follow.
All right. Well, I'll love to build on that. I think if you're silent, you're being part of the problem. So, Broderick, I've always had this weird thing, like, where I want to confront awkwardness. Like, if something's awkward, I'm just going to like relish in that moment. I'm going to have a conversation. And I've always, I don't know if it was part of my upbringing. My parents weren't around a lot. I always hung out with people of all different walks of life. And I've always valued different perspectives, opinions, love talking to people from other parts of the world and seeing how they view similar issues. One of the things I love most about this, like working in the elementary space. So I've worked in industry in high school, middle school, and now in elementary school with some teams, and is that the kids are not the problem. You know, kids are a reflection of what they've learned and what they've experienced. And so if we can shift those narratives for kids so that kids can, everyone has something to add. When designers and engineers are all old white guys with curly hair and glasses, like, well, we need designers from all walks of life to solve the problems that we see in this world today. And so I think working in that early space, shifting the mindsets for teachers is a huge piece of it, but providing opportunities for kids to see themselves and not allow what has been the societal norm to kind of soak in, inspiring kids to show them where education can take them is really, really exciting work for me and work that I'm really passionate about. One of the small things that I do lately is like, I'm all about language. Like, what is the language that we're using? Because words have power, people's names have power. And so, I mean, one example is the word chief. Like, we're in our district, we have chief of leadership and learning. And I'm like, I don't think I'm comfortable using that word unless Native Americans have given me the right in my area or wherever to use that word. So, you know, what are we allowing on websites and what are we disallowing, and changing the words that we're using that are just perpetuating these things for kids is a big part of that work as well. But I love the opportunity in the elementary space to work with teachers. So.
Thank you all for those answers to that really huge question. And so now that we've discussed a little bit about what that definition means and what anti-racism is, we just want to touch a little bit on what that journey looks like in practice before we get to our Q&A. And I know that a lot of folks are very excited to get to the Q&A. But just, you know, really, really quickly, what does that journey look like? I'm going to start with you, Broderick, then we'll pass off to you, Laura, and then we'll finish with you, Michael, and then we'll do the Q&A, okay?
Absolutely. And so the journey for me personally is really a journey inward, a lot of self-awareness and self-reflection. And the thing that really helps me in that space is just the art of asking the right questions and being courageous enough to ask when you don't know. I think you know, it's super important to ask those questions, and so asking those questions of others, asking those questions of myself, you know, wrestling with concepts like privilege and what does that even look like in my context. Clearly, I'm an African American male. I'm a person of color, however you want to characterize that. I have melanin as part of my, you know, experience, and you know, but I recognize I have certain privileges given, you know, where I sit right now. So it's really just a journey of introspection and questioning everything is really where I'm at. So walk with those questions without a doubt. Be courageous enough to ask. You know, fear is a mind killer. So let go of the fear and being honest, open, and genuine with people, even in your own state of not knowing. I think people in general will be very forgiving and open to be able to respond to those questions.
Thank you. I love
Absolutely.
that. I thought about it a bit in terms of our journey as an organization, and just thinking about the fact that, you know, we started very committed to bringing more young people into teaching, knowing that there are so many people who don't realize like what a great job teaching could be, and they discover late, you know, in their college experience that maybe they would like to do this. And so, you know, when back in 2014, at the beginning of the organization, we were thinking a lot about closing the achievement gap and providing great teachers for all and ensuring equality of opportunity, and thinking about high quality education. And I think that these things are important, but I've come to learn that even thinking about closing the achievement gap has a racist lens, and thinking about measuring achievement of Black and Brown students in terms of white students and calling it a gap in their achievement, which is a identifying with the children the opportunities that have been differentiated that they have not received, as well as ignoring the history in our country of stereotype threat, ignoring the fact that their histories are erased in classes, ignoring the implicit bias that they may encounter in school, ignoring the inequitable disciplinary policies. So that's just one of many ways we've come to think about it differently. And we've also thought about this idea of providing great teachers for all, which is often said. And if we are truly anti-racist, then we know that talent is distributed equitably among all the races. So unless all races are represented in a school in proportion to their representation in the policy, then there's something that's inequitable going on. So when I hear a charter school saying, like, we just focus on hiring the best teachers, we'll think about race later. Well, if your composition of your school does not look like the population, then your definition of great was not equitable, and it had racism in the lens. And then we've also come to realize that ensuring equality of opportunity ignores the fact that there have been generations of inequity, and they have a cumulative impact on the opportunities that our children have. And of course, we're seeing the disproportionate impact of the pandemic, but all it's doing is bringing to light what's been going on with our kids, what's been going on as a result of redlining, the inequitable distribution of the GI Bill. Like, all of these things add up, and they've continued to add up for our kids. And so for us, I think it's been moving from that into a place where we were like, okay, we're going to be all about social justice education. We're going to move from thinking about, like, how do we get all our kids to grade level? How do we make sure they catch up during the summer, to thinking about how can we leverage summer to make sure they're learning the content that we know is not covered during the school year, and how can we really give context to the social justice issues they've encountered with the goal of raising consciousness. But even that's not enough, is what we've realized. Like, talking about the things that are social justice issues and seeing the issues and acknowledging them is helpful, but it's not the whole story. And we've come to realize that the whole story involves being explicitly anti-racist and reckoning with our past and the present implications of it, and defining and redistributing power within our organization, within our programming, and looking at it within our community. And then naming and dismantling the structures that are perpetuating inequity, and committing to equity as an organization, so that our goal is to remove the smog from the air that we all breathe, and realizing that white supremacy has a horrible impact on everybody. Even people who choose it are damaged by it. And so this for us has been the journey as an organization, for us as individuals and as a community, to go from a place where we're trying to help our kids to realizing, like, we are all damaged by what's going on, and we all have to heal together.
I will share really quickly. I know I shared a very personal journey, but it's really an opportunity for us right now to really double down on mission. It is not okay that some kids don't have opportunity over the summertime, that they start the school year way behind others. And we're gifted intellectual people. We know that this is going on. And so how do we move from just the words on the paper to actual change that's going to, create a pathway for these mostly Black and brown young folks to achieve just like everybody else. And so part of that journey is just doubling down on mission.
Yeah, I mean, to build on top of that, in California, there's talk about, people getting their pods so that someone can help students through their learning. I don't think anyone doesn't want a child to have a tutor. I think we want all children to have the opportunity to have that tutor to support them in their learning. Just, again, building on our programs, things that we want to make sure that students are able to see and experience is that we find a lot of our kids don't necessarily know what's outside of their 5-mile radius. If they don't know someone that's in a STEM career, if they don't have a friend or a parent that's in a STEM career, it's really hard for them to even think about what that might look like. So one of the coolest things about partnering with our community is we have a lot of different diverse representation in engineering and STEM on the news. And so if we can provide opportunities for kids to see themselves in those careers, to hear and to see from people that look like them, that have similar experiences to them, and if those people are willing to check in with kids more than once, because then they feel like that there's ownership and belonging, and that there's meaning behind that. We think that we can really help to change as part of that situation, to change the narratives. And we want to develop that system all the way from elementary into middle into high school. So we develop these excursions at the middle school to get kids out into industry, to see diverse, engaging people, providing these learning experiences for them in the workplace. So Qualcomm's Think a Bit Lab was an awesome opportunity to do that. And then getting kids in high school in career-themed pathways into internships or into apprenticeships. That's all part of that work, and having those mentors is really strong along the way. I'm a lover of research, and so if you've ever read anything from Hattie about the meta-analysis about effect size on student learning, we know that if we are all on board moving in the same direction, that we can make significant change in students' lives and educational outcomes. And so if we're all sharing this information together, we're all moving in this direction together, that's huge. But also this self-reported grades, that's students' perceptions of themselves. The things that we do in classrooms, the little things that we say as early as first grade, second grade, and kindergarten, those are things that can last a really long time. And so the way that teachers either believe in their students or not, and whether that's a color or race, a background or whatever, those are things that can have lasting impacts on kids. And these little humans deserve every single opportunity. And so we as adults need to be very mindful about the ways that we're approaching students. If you look at some of the research that Dr. Juke Wood has done in our schools, you can look at, there's a whole course for Black Minds Matter. Look at those prerequisites, right? Acknowledging your own unconscious bias, redressing disparate educational outcomes for Black boys and Black men and men in education in general. We as a district are committed to being culturally responsive, providing training for teachers. One of the trainings that we're going to do tomorrow will be interviewing students of color and they're in high school and looking at those elementary experiences so that teachers can see that students being suspended in first and second grade, 3 times more likely to be suspended if you're a student of color, being expelled by third grade, by first grade, those are things that are not setting kids up for success and can have huge detrimental impacts to those individual students in our society as a whole. So we want to make sure we're calling those things out. Data paints a picture and data tells a story. These things are happening in our schools. Like, you can't argue with the data. So there's things that we need to do about that to shift what's happening in our schools and outcomes for our kids.
Well, thank you all so much for that. We have quite a few questions. Everybody's, we're really excited to engage with the 3 of you. But first, I'll start with some of the questions that we had from folks when they registered. So one of those is, with differing opinions, values, and perspectives, how do we engage families in these conversations? And anyone can answer in any order. We'll just do this freestyle.
I think it's just a commitment to having the conversation, quite frankly. It's not rocket science. I mean, wherever, young people and parents and families meet, creating a space to have those kinds of frank conversations. And please don't call it an anti-racist session with parents. Maybe perhaps call it something more, more friendly, but just have the conversation. Please have the conversation. I know we're very big in out of school time on having spaghetti dinners and that kind of thing, and the culminating activity for the performance that the young people want to do. Weave in some time to talk about what it means to be human, our shared human experience, what it means to be, victimized by some of these systems that are designed to hold us down. Take a couple of minutes to have the conversation. We know the conversation is the most important part and a pathway to healing.
Yeah, and have the first conversation, because then the second one becomes easier to have, and the third one's even easier than that. And I think it just really comes down to, when you're working with families, especially from the education side of things, you have to listen. Like, we're in service of our families. We want to do whatever it is that we can to set our students and our families up for success. So it's our job first to listen, not to tell. And I know that that's not necessarily what you might experience on a day-to-day. But for all of our teachers, I would encourage them, have the first conversation and see where it goes. Really, listen to understand what someone's saying to you. And then let's have a talk about, what that means. How can we work together to fix this or move forward?
I agree with both those points. One of the things that I think we found this year, particularly with going to a virtual environment, was how critical it was to double down on family communication and family partnership. And one of the points that we really explicitly train our teaching fellows on is that our families are the experts. They're the experts on our children, and they love them. Like, we love our kids. Like, our teaching fellows just love our students, and realizing, like, these are the people who love your kids even more than you do, and they are showing you the greatest honor because they're sharing their children with you. So how do we approach our families with that kind of deference and respect and appreciation, and then use that as the foundation for a strong relationship, and then a consistent relationship. So the families are not getting a call when something goes wrong, but they're getting a call regularly. So when there's an opportunity for a more challenging conversation, the foundation is there and the bond is there. And one of the systems we use is we use restorative circles. So when there's been a conflict that is beyond the scope of like a single student, another student, but actually could involve the larger community, we bring our families into that conversation as well. And that's been another way to have those conversations with families where things have come up. And I put together some resources on how we do those restorative conversations that I can share in the chat if it lets me. So I will do that as well.
You all. And I think the next question is a question that, you know, is on everyone's mind as it applies to anti-racism, but also just in general. How does this work translate into remote learning? How does anti-racist work with your students translate remotely?
I have a hard time separating the real world from the virtual world. I think, you know, it all applies. I just think the mode of transmission might be a little different. You have to work a little bit harder to maintain connections with folks. I find giving folks in the virtual space a little bit of pre-work first to really think about it, and nothing like huge, but just like a short article before we get into the space to kind of peel these things back. And then I'm, you know, putting some post work in there. You know, having the learning where we're synchronous, we're in front of each other, having these conversations, but having them step away from the computer screen for, 8 minutes. Let's take this 8 minutes and just kind of really dig deep in this and work on the honor system. Like, if you really want to leverage this time together, really use that 8 minutes and then come back to the screen. But it's not a huge leap in terms of what we do in the physical world. I can't see you. I can't put my hand on your shoulder or do that activity where we got thumbs up, thumbs down, and some of those things I won't be able to do. But we can be super creative to figure out ways to be as interactive as possible and to maintain those connections. The other piece also out there is artistry is universal. And so sometimes just saying, we're going to spend the next couple of minutes in a poetry exercise, and, you can write a haiku, you can string 2 or 3 haikus together, poetry in motion or music, and those kinds of things really open up conversation and dialogue and connect people.
Yeah, I feel like a broken record, but I'm going to have to agree with you. When I work with schools or districts or administrators, and people say, how do you define quality online learning? I ask them, how do you define quality learning? Now we can talk about technology tools to make that happen in the digital space or from distance, but unless we have an understanding of what anti-racism or what quality looks like in the ideal situation, we need to figure that out first before we figure out what tools are going to make us most successful. So the language that we use in person or online is not going to change unless we really have taken the time to think that out ahead of time. So
we, as I said, did online learning this summer, and so some of the things that we would call out explicitly that are, I agree 100%, it's true in person, but you have to program it, I think, a little more intentionally in online is one, building community among the teachers and adults who are leading, because if your staff is all remote and they're engaging kids on their screen and they're not connecting to each other, they can feel really isolated really quickly. And this is a perfect example of what Michael's talking about. That happens in regular school too. We have teachers who feel isolated from their colleagues and don't feel part of a community. online, you don't have a faculty room where they're going to run into each other. So you have to schedule like a time. So we would do a morning huddle with all of our teaching fellows every day to bring them together and inspire each other for the day. And we do an afternoon reflection time every day so that people are supported in their work. And then we all know student engagement is critical in person and online. Online, it looks a little bit different because you have to use different tools. And because being online is boring in ways that it's not in person, you have to up the frequency and you have to change up the strategy. So if it's a chat, a breakout room, a poll, emoji, like an exercise showing on your fingers, drawing on the virtual whiteboard, like the frequency at which it happens has to intensify, or else you're going to lose kids because they're going to be in a different tab or they're going to be on their smartphone. We also found that you have to schedule and facilitate fun because you don't have the things that normally bring kids to school. Like they're not going to see that cute person by their locker. So if you don't do fun stuff, like what gets them through the day normally won't happen. So how do you do those? We did those with community meetings where we did everything from like, would you rather stay up all night or sleep all day? And they would write in the chat and we'd play songs and they'd guess which one it was. And, which teaching fellow is this? And like just games that engage them. And it was like, we're the adults, we're kind of dorks, but we are facilitating fun, and our kids appreciate that because otherwise they don't have a way to connect the way they normally do in school. And then the other thing I would just add is that we had to staff tech like at a different level. So in school, you staff hallways, you staff cafeterias, you staff outdoor space, and in person, you have, when you're remote, you have to staff tech because you're going to have problems every day, and people have to feel supported so they don't disengage. And it's stressful, and it's an opportunity to model how you manage stress and support in a community.
And just to build on that real quick, we're running a training right now with 250 educators. Like a year ago, I couldn't get 250 educators in the same building at the same time, right? So with this crisis and what's happening in the world today, there's opportunity for us to have these courageous conversations, but there's also opportunity for us to scale programs that previously we were constrained by the limits that we thought we had. So as people, have more skills in technology, they're more able to interact in meaningful ways with us online, which allows us to for really affordably spread messages and provide professional learning and change outcomes at a much larger scale than we had before. And I apologize that I'm going to have to jump because I'm going to go facilitate some more professional learning right now. So
great to be on the call with you, brother.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much. So thank you to Laura and Broderick. If you all have just one more minute, if you could answer just one more question for us, just quick action item. Just advice, an action item on how to encourage anti-racism in a non-traditional teaching setting. So essentially expanded learning, just one way that we could do that from each of you.
I'm just of the belief that you can use anything to teach anything. Every moment there's an opportunity to lift up ideation and have conversation. And I think just having the courage to create a safe space where folks can connect to these ideas, understand that the full world that we live in, understand how some of these systems that we touch, even some of the entertainment that we consume, how that perpetuates some of these things. So just getting young people to, particularly young folks, to really think about their environment and just creating a space that is just totally okay to do that. One of the great things about being an out-of-school time facilitator is that you don't have to know all the answers. You just have to hold space and create a platform for possibility. And I let go of that having to know and really put myself in a place where I can be educated and inspired by the ideas and creativity of our young folks. My job is to hold space, and at the end of the day, the young people will carry us through as they always have.
Agree. Just a final thought, like the feedback we get from our kids, families, fellows is fodder for everything that we're developing every year. And I think one of the advantages of extended learning time programs is we often have a little more time to plan than school year, regular school does. And so really using that opportunity to learn from our participants about what they want to learn more of and what worked well for them can be a chance to be even more intentional about what we're trying to do.
Okay, I could honestly hear both of you all talk for the rest of the day, and I'm sure there are lots of folks who are still on the call who feel the same way, but I just want to say thank you so much, Laura, Broderick. Thanks to our partners at NSLA. Thanks to Michael, who is doing some amazing professional learning training today and took a break to be with us. And hopefully we can get together soon and continue the conversation. So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.